Hello everyone, welcome to this month's Star Wars review, where I'm going to begin with a small explanation and an apology for a change in the schedule. Basically what I'm going to be doing is switching the May review with the July review because of something that kind of cropped up. Originally this month I was going to be reviewing part 1 of the X-Wing series. I was going to start diving into those books. The X-Wing books are somewhat fairly well regarded in the expanded universe pantheon of novels by Star Wars fans, and I thought it would be fun to finally dive into those and start reviewing those. But then I started to think, all right, how should I arrange those? Should I do it like read the first 5 as part 1 and then read the second or the final 5 as part 2? It's 10 books in all. And I thought, I don't know. Then I thought maybe the best way to do it would just be to do part 1 all about the Rogue Squadron and part 2 all about the Wraith Squadron. And I think that might be a better way to organize it. The problem with that is that one of the books that focuses on Rogue Squadron I have not read yet. It's called Isard's Revenge, and I haven't dove into that one as of right now. So I'm going to move that review to July, so you'll be getting that in July, X-Wing Part 1. By then I'll have fully read Isard's Revenge, and I'll have plenty to say about the Rogue Squadron portion of the X-Wing books, and then Part 2 will come at some point where I go over all the Wraith Squadron books and all the other goods and plenties in the X-Wing series. So that should be fun. Looking forward to that. I've got something else planned for June. That one's going to be a lot of fun as well. So that left me with a bit of a vacuum here in May. So what ultimately what I decided to do is just switch May and July and just do that. So for this month, I'm going to be reviewing The Crystal Star by Vonda McIntyre, a very interesting book, to say the least. Interesting in the sense that most fans of the expanded universe pretty much agree that it is the worst Star Wars book ever written, and I've read some bad ones. I've read some really bad ones. I was not the biggest fan of the Kalista trilogy. I was not the biggest fan of the Jedi Academy trilogy. I did not like Aftermath, if we want to bring the Disney canon into it. I did not like those books very much either. So there have been some bad ones. Next month's review is going to focus on ones that are arguably worse than Crystal Star, but unfortunately Crystal Star is towards the bottom when it comes to quality Star Wars books, and it's a very early one too. This one came out in the years following the Thrawn trilogy and was kind of after Timothy Zahn's work really put Star Wars in print on the map and started this whole thing with the expanded universe. We got a handful of books that followed. Some of them were good, some of them were not so good. This one felt like a complete misfire, and I really don't want to sound like I'm crapping on Vonda McIntyre as a writer, and I've actually never read any of her other works, but to me there's a difference between crapping on a book as opposed to crapping on a movie. A movie is a very collaborative process with the guys that work on it having to answer to so many different taskmasters, from the studio to the fans to investors and various other things. So it's just with movies, and there's so many different people working on it, from actors to people behind the scenes to the director to the writer and everything else. So there's just so much stuff going on with the movie that it feels like this gigantic group effort, and sometimes it works really well and other times it doesn't work so well. With a book, it's a little bit more personal because I feel like the author is just pouring their heart and soul into this thing, and not that they don't answer to people as well, like the publishers and various other things, but there's something about an author's work that is a lot more personal, and if I just completely eviscerate the book, it'll just feel like I'm trashing this person's singular efforts, and I don't want to do that. I know that she's known for writing Star Trek. She wrote a couple Star Trek standalone books. I think, if I'm not mistaken, she also wrote the novelizations for Star Treks 2, 3, and 4, which Star Trek 2 and 4 are probably my 2 favorite Trek films, so it's I'd actually be really interested in reading those novelizations. But and maybe that's the problem, because Star Trek to me has a much different voice than Star Wars, and just because you're good at writing for one doesn't necessarily mean that you can easily transition and do the other. They're 2 very different things. They get compared a lot because they're both science fiction, but to me, both franchises have very different voices, and maybe her voice and style lends itself better to Star Trek. I don't know. There's actually some ideas and concepts presented in this book that to me would fit better in Star Trek, and didn't work as well in Star Wars. But you know, reading over this book, before I even get into plot, character, or story, the prose of the book doesn't even really sound right. It doesn't read very well. I think back to Stephen King. I think I've made this comment about Stephen King in the past, where if you sit down and actually think about his stories and getting from point A to point B and whether or not anything made sense, you can almost pick these things apart. There's a lot of things in Stephen King books that don't make any sense or just plain dumb, like hedge maze, or not hedge maze, but like hedge animals coming to life and attacking people, or other weird crap like that. But his books read very, very well. They are very, they're page turners. They're designed to be page turners. And I think he's got a great way of writing his stories that way, even if the stories themselves don't make a whole lot of sense. I think that's one of the reasons why so many of his movies have turned out poorly, is that some people try to capture, you're getting, unless you do like The Shining, like Kubrick did with The Shining, and you just kind of make it your own, like the faults of the story get exposed when you don't have Stephen King's voice to kind of cover it up. But here you kind of get this book that just isn't comfortable to read. It just doesn't sound good. And actually, I don't own a physical copy of the book, but I do have this digital one. Where is it? I had it. There we go. Okay, this is an exchange between Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. Luke Skywalker, who feels wildly out of character through most of the book. This is an argument they had where during one of their missions, Han ran into an ex-girlfriend, and Luke is sticking up for his sister, feeling that Han's being unfaithful to Leia or something. And here's their exchange. Let me pull it up. "What the hell's the matter with you?" Han asked, poised halfway between laughing and losing his temper. "What are you going to do? Chop me to pieces because I spent a few hours alone with an old friend?" He had not intended to sound defensive, but that was how it came out. It offended him that Luke felt the need to chastise him for his behavior. It insulted him that Luke felt the need to remind Han of his vows to Leia. "I don't know what I'm going to do," Luke said. "Apologize, that would be a good start." Luke glared without replying. "If you don't trust me," Han said angrily, "if you don't think Leia should trust me, why'd you come with me? Or is that why you came with me?" The ration pack crushed between Han's fingers, littering the carpet with protein crumbs. "I'm going out," Luke said, "to try and cool down." He headed for the door. "And I hope I don't run into your old friend while I'm at it." Oh my God, Luke in particular feels completely off in this story, and that's kind of where we're coming from here, where even before you get into, I start analyzing the plot and the characters, well, I guess this ties into the characters, but you kind of get the example of what I'm talking about, where it feels like all the character development from the original trilogy for Han and Luke feels like it was thrown out the window here, and it just feels like they're two bickering children, and especially on Luke's end, and it doesn't sound right, it doesn't feel natural, and that just takes me out of the story entirely. The story itself doesn't work that well because it focuses very heavily on the Solo children. They get kidnapped again. That was becoming a normal thing in the expanded universe. And it started with the Thrawn trilogy, and with, you know, putting the Solo kids in danger, but it happened so frequently that it became annoying. And, you know, I think back to my review of the Jedi Academy trilogy, where they go to the zoo and C-3PO and Chewbacca are supposed to be watching over them, and they go running off and having their own little adventure because they're delightful little scamps. And C-3PO and Chewie go on a wacky adventure to find the kids in the space zoo, and it was just so bad. And you know, the Solo children getting in danger, and I think at this point in the timeline they were like 5 years old, but anytime like the Solo children got in danger, and in this case it's actually all three of them, the Solo children and a 3-year-old Anakin, it just got annoying, and it just turned into something that Star Wars shouldn't be, which was kind of Saturday morning cartoon-esque, where it's like, oh, the kids are kids are captured by the bad guys, and now they got to outsmart the bad guy. And the bad guy in question here is named Hethrir, who is a supposed pupil of Darth Vader and yet another dark side user who's trying to bring the Empire back, called the Empire Reborn. How many, like, friggin' Empire offshoots were there of, like, these assholes that were trying to bring back the Empire? It felt like, again, I started with the Thrawn trilogy with Thrawn, but that made sense coming out of Return of the Jedi. And by this point, and with some of the other books that were coming out, it's like, geez, how many of these assholes are there? Good Lord. But he is up there. Hethrir is up there as one of the lamest Star Wars villains ever because he gets punked out by the kids who are, you know, just kind of making a fool out of him most of the time. And, you know, it almost feels like a Rugrats episode at times. I think they kick him in the shin at one point. It's kind of silly. And giving the Solo children that much attention under such silly circumstances does not make for a fun read. And while all that's going on, Leia and Chewbacca are the ones that are tasked with going to go save the children and hunt them down and do their whole mission with that, while Luke and Han are off on their own mission to find potential Jedi recruits, and they come across the Crystal Star, which is controlled by an evil blob from another dimension who is worshipped as part of a cult. You see where I'm getting kind of the Star Trek vibes here? This feels like something that would have come out of a Star Trek story. And the evil blob, Waru, is actually in command of Hethrir. What a coincidence! Luke and Han are going off on this mission, and they come across the guy that's controlling Hethrir, and Leia just happens to be dealing with that same person as she tries to save her kids from them. It's just, what a giant coincidence that is. It's kind of like the coincidence in the Solo movie where Emil Clark is gone for 3 years and Han just happens to run in a small galaxy, I guess. But in any case, it's, yeah, I think a lot of the concepts that they focus on just don't really work here, because you have this really, like, silly storyline with the Solo children being kidnapped, and you have Luke and Han dealing with this evil interdimensional blob, which almost, again, I've made comparisons to Star Trek. I'm also kind of reminded of that episode of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe where Skeletor summons Shagora, who's like this evil blob from another world, and the evil blob like takes over Castle Grayskull, and the good guys and the bad guys have to team up to stop him. Fun episode, written by Paul Dini, Batman the Animated Series. He was famous for writing on that. A lot of connections here. It's almost like, I'll get to Kevin Bacon at some point, but in any case, yeah, the story's just, it's split into those really three different plot lines where you've got Leia and Chewie going to look for the kids. You have the kids dealing with Hethrir, and then you have Luke and Han off on their mission. And there's really no relief to any of it. Like, the least objectionable of all of them is Leia and Chewie, which is a good pairing. I like, you know, that's one of the things where Empire Strikes Back kind of negatively impacted Star Wars, where everybody felt the need, like, oh, it's always got to be Han, Leia, and Chewie, and Luke and R2, and that's how the group will always be split up. But I always liked it whenever they tried to, like, shake it up a little bit. Even though I wasn't a fan of Barbara Hambly's books, I did like the one where she paired up Luke and 3PO, and then R2 with Han and Leia. I like that dynamic more because it's just playing around with it and trying different things and seeing what else you can get out of these characters. So I thought separating it this way, with Chewie going off with Leia and Han and Luke going off on their own thing, was more interesting than it would have been if they just kept it to the typical Empire splitting. But it still doesn't work when the story doesn't work, so that's unfortunate. The best thing in the story, and it doesn't even work because I just don't care about anything that's going on. Anyway, Waru, which I sound like I'm mispronouncing that, but I don't think I am. He feeds off the Force, so when Luke is in close proximity to him, like, his Force powers go away, which kind of explains his irritable behavior, which is kind of silly, but okay. And Hethrir has promised to feed him a Force user, so that'll give him the strength to be able to take over the galaxy, I guess, and as part of this Empire Reborn. So it's like they can't decide if they want to bring the Empire back, or if they want to just, or if they're religious fanatics worshipping this evil blob, and that's how, and he's just going to take over the galaxy. They haven't really, I'd rather go with the evil cult thing and just play with that a lot more. But anyway, it's kind of silly, and there's some major kind of inconsistencies and plot holes along the way. At the end, Waru, after Luke escapes and the children escape and everybody's safe, Waru ends up eating Hethrir, which begs the question, why didn't he just do that in the first place? I mean, why go to all the trouble of concocting this plan to get the Solo children and presumably feed them to this blob, or get Luke or Leia to be the one to be fed to him? And why do all that when Waru could have just eaten Hethrir right away? And he could have saved us. It could have saved us this entire experience. I'm just saying, but it's yeah, this is not a good book, and there's nothing about it that's really funny bad. I guess the funniest bad thing in the whole thing is that there's this new alien race that's introduced, of these multi-armed people that evolve from dog-like creatures or wolf-like creatures called werewolves. And it's not spelled like werewolves, like we would normally spell it. It's spelled like W-Y-R-W-U-L-V-S or E-S or something like that. It's spelled really strangely. So basically they're like space werewolves, but it's spelled like werewolves. I think back to that MS23K episode with that actress with the thick European accent. She couldn't quite say werewolf, so it always came out as werewolf. A werewolf? A werewolf? Hafoofith? But yeah, this wins for one of the silliest Star Wars aliens ever created. It's like, wait, so you have these dog people that evolve into human-looking creatures with multiple arms? That's just weird. And the name is just so silly. Like, I know the name has been made fun of by many, many other reviewers and many, many other Star Wars fans. And I will follow suit and do the same thing because that name is ridiculous. So, and again, it's one of those things where, would that work a little bit better in Star Trek? Maybe not with that name, but I could envision, like, a creature like that more fitting into the Star Trek world. And because Star Trek is more philosophical and more about details and, parallels to society and politics and philosophy and various other things. Whereas Star Wars is more strictly about straight up action adventure storytelling with fantasy elements. Not saying one's better than the other. I'm more of a Star Wars guy, obviously, but it's I don't know. It's one of those weird things where I feel like maybe a lot of the ideas here were better suited for something else. And maybe Vonda McIntyre is more suited for writing for Star Trek. I don't know. But yeah, The Crystal Star, I'm not going to say it's the worst Star Wars book ever, because I think I may have found worse than that. But I will say it is a very bizarre, odd, tough to read, unpleasant to read experience, and I do not recommend it at all. I say skip it, skip it, skip it. If you do skip it, you're not really missing anything, because all you're getting is like the Solo kids on another adventure and Luke and Han acting like idiots, and that's about it. That's all there is. It's a very there's nothing in here that story-wise that you haven't seen in various other things, and various other things have done it better. So an unfortunate misfire for the expanded universe, but they can't all be winners, especially when you produce as many books as they did over all the years that they did through the expanded universe. You know, they can't all be great. Not all of them are going to be the Thrawn trilogy. But yeah, I can't even recommend this book as like a so bad it's good read. It's just kind of like a boring mess. Is the best way to describe it. But like I said, that concludes this review. Like I said, the X-Wing Part 1 review will be pushed back to July, so be on the lookout for that. And I have something else planned for June that I want to get into. I'm really excited for the June review. That's one that I really, really want to talk about. But yeah, thanks again for everybody for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, retweet this video, hit the little bell in the corner, and get reminders whenever I post new videos. But that is all I have for you right now. For all you Star Wars fans that love watching these reviews, I'm all done here, so peace out, and I'll see you again in a month.